So, first things first, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Just waking up.
Did you fly in this morning?
No, I came on the train last night from Paris. So I've been doing like big promo days throughout Europe for about a week now.
Okay.
This is the last day.
So hopefully you're not sick and tired of these questions yet.
I was telling my bandmate last night that, you know, it's such an interesting thing when you're making an album. At least for me, I'm talking about myself a lot and focusing on myself, and that's kind of what's coming out. And then, you know, you kind of forget that you're also going to have to talk about yourself, you know, and have it be recorded. So it's been, you know, 8 hours a day of me talking about myself, and I feel a bit silly about it sometimes, you know, because I put so much down into the lyrics that is often kind of like vulnerable. I talk about things that are maybe very personal for me, and then people want to know more. You know, you can't just end there. People have a lot of questions, and but no, I'm really happy to talk about it. I think talking about important things is really important, and that's the kind of world I want to live in. So I've been really trying to be honest and open in all of my interviews, and sometimes I feel like I think that's what gets the most exhausting, is when you're talking about things that are more important than rock and roll. It does become a bit draining, but I have energy for you, so I think we can have a nice interview.
Well, then I wrote down a bunch of lyrics as well, and we'll see how far we get
Cool.
with them. But if there's anything you don't prefer not to talk
No,
about,
let's
just say. And
let's talk about
we're all
everything.
good. But before we jump straight into the album, you mentioned just now that you find it important to talk about significant things, and I think it was right before the previous album that change sort of came into the music. So
Yeah.
what was that transition like for you?
Well, you know, it's pretty simple. It was sort of a culmination of two things. One was I was at a point in my life where I was ready to sort of expose who I was, and I was ready to kind of investigate for myself who I was. So you know, with Abysmal Thoughts, it started the very beginning of sort of personal exploration of myself as a human, as an artist, you know, kind of as just like as an individual, like who am I and what's going on with me, and is there a way to help myself, or is this my life for good? You know, and I was ready to explore that, and at the same time, the band became one. It became just me, which gave me the freedom to do that. You know, I think if Jacob was still in the band, or if I had other band members, it might be difficult for me to feel free to really talk about things that are really personal. And, you know, I remember Jacob often rolling his eyes if I wrote anything that he called dramatic, you know, oh, you're so dramatic. And, you know, I think some people are afraid to talk about matters of the heart, but I'm not afraid to do that. I mean, that to me is the most important thing. I am, despite all of the sad themes in my music, I am on a search for joy. I truly am, and I want to be happy. And, you know, I think that joy comes out of human connection. I think that's truly where we find joy. It's not with things. It's not really with superficial circumstance. It's really about connecting with another human, and also connecting with yourself. Those are what the things that bring us joy. And I don't think you can have connection with anyone if you don't have also vulnerability. If you're just showing the world your happy side, you're not really connecting. You can't shut off one emotion and show the rest, or you can't shut off most of your emotions and show a couple of them. I mean, if you shut something off, you're shutting all of it off. And so I think, in order to connect, you become vulnerable, and I want to do that in my music. I want to do that in interviews. I want to do that when I'm out to dinner with a good friend, and I want to do that if I meet someone on the street corner. I want to have meaningful dialogue, and it's kind of like it can be a lonely experience for a while, because most of my life I have been someone who I would believe that I didn't deserve beautiful, rich relationships, stemming from my childhood. My parents were not so kind to me and always made me feel worthless and that I wasn't worthy of love and good things. And so I carried that into my teenage years and my adult years, and I still deal with it, But I'm at the point now where I want to connect, and I think I deserve beautiful relationships, whether it's with a lover or a friend, and so I even want to bring that into the band. I want to have a good connection with my bandmates, and I want my fans to feel connected to me, and I want to feel connected to them. And I think the only way to do that is to really speak the truth about myself, and to kind of bear it all. So,
was it, because I can imagine delving into yourself in that way can be quite confronting. So was it a difficult process to get kind of to where you are now, where you can write and talk about all these issues?
Yeah, it's been a lifelong process, really, but it's one of those things that once you start kind of making yourself vulnerable, you see that you don't want to go back. It's like eating American chocolate your whole life, and then you go to Switzerland and have a bite of their chocolate, and you're like, why would I ever eat that plastic stuff again? It's like stepping into something new, and the songs feel more important. And if what you're doing feels important and it's affecting people, why would you go back and do something that's more idealized or imaginative, There was an album I made called Encyclopedia that was sort of it was the time in my life where I was going through a really difficult time. I was sort of going through a separation with my family, and that was, really traumatic. And I think my heart was hurting so much that normally I would try to express that, but with this particular pain, I didn't want to write about it. It was too big for me to talk about, so I pushed away from it. And that album is mostly, imaginative writing. It's like almost like watching a movie or something like that. And so when I listen back to my records, that one to me is the one that feels the least like me. It's almost this foreign object in my portfolio. And it's because I wasn't connected to how I was feeling. I was pushing it all away. And so with Abysmal Thoughts, I stepped back into all of that. So yeah, it might be a difficult thing to do at first, but once you see, it's just like, it's a much more beautiful and meaningful existence. I want everything to be meaningful, you know? I want my life to be meaningful. I want my relationships to be meaningful. I want my art to be meaningful. I don't care about riches. I don't care about fame. I really care about being effective. And that's it. So I think this is one way that I can do that.
So with that said then, did it make kind of the whole process of brutalism easier then, in a way, because you've kind of made that switch in your mind, and how did you start this process, and did it come kind of naturally, and did it just flow?
Yeah, Brutalism was sort of the next chapter of Abysmal Thoughts, sort of. And so through Abysmal Thoughts, through that whole process, I was I started going to a therapist and taking my life seriously, started eating differently, which has really affected my depression levels in a great way. And I started making choices that were more intentional, you know, being more aware of the things that make me happy and more aware of the things that make me sad. Most of my life as an artist, I've romanticized pain and always sort of thought, well, I'm an artist, I'm supposed to have pain, and, you know, I kind of idealized what being an artist was and what pain was. But really, I had to be honest with myself, like, I don't want to be in pain. I want to feel good like everyone else. And so I got serious about it, you know, and I started, you know, helping myself and making some big changes. Actually, I moved to Los Angeles, and that was really huge for me. It gave me the space and clarity to sort of understand what it was I needed. You know, I was living in New York, and everything is so crazy and rushed, and doesn't leave a lot of space for self awareness and listening to yourself. And so I made some decisions that helped me. One of those was that I was able to trust myself enough to kind of be one of the areas I was trying to like combat was like the control side of me, you know. Just like I would be so controlling over everything in my life, you know, like from, you know, where I'd go out to eat to how I would need to dress to the person I was dating to the music I was making, everything. Like I had to do it very much my way, and I knew exactly how I wanted it. But how I wanted it wasn't always the way that was best for me. It was just a way that I could control everything, you know. And I think we do everything in life either out of love or out of fear. And I was starting to make records from a place of fear, like, oh, I've got to hold on to how I do things. Right. That's not a place of love. It's not really loving myself. It's about being scared of something new. So I was very aware of that. And so for Brutalism, I wanted to open up. And so I had guitar players come in and bass players, and we had live drums, and I had people writing with me. And this is all stuff that 3 years ago I would have said over my dead body, like, that's not going to happen. We had a sound engineer and a mixing engineer, and, you know, it was a really collaborative process. But what it did was just so beautiful. It gave me room to focus on what it is I wanted to say. Because for me right now, the form isn't as important as the function, you know, and it's really important that my message comes across for me. So if I have my friend Brian working on a bass line and recording that, I can be in another room just being there with my thoughts, with my heart. And maybe people who are watching this that are in bands are like, yeah, that's what you do. Like one person does bass, one person. But for me, that was never my experience. I did the bass, I did the guitar, I did the drums, I did the vocals. And it was all a way for me to feel safe. And so I've really, by letting go, this album was just full of so much inspiration and fresh blood, and it sounds fresh, like it sounds vivid and colorful, and it still sounds like the drums because, I mean, it's me, you know. So I learned to, it was also an exercise in trust. Like I learned to trust people a little bit more and to trust myself, like, and to love myself. Like, I think that's just a gift to myself to say, you don't have to do everything, you know, because that's a really exhausting process and it's really lonely, you know.
Well, I was going to say, because working in that fashion, it's I can imagine very exhausting. So this freedom, this newfound freedom, you mentioned that it kind of allowed you to delve into these kind of issues and topics, and there's a couple I want to get into. So, but there's one in particular that I found interesting on Loner. There's you mentioned Seneca, and now I'm not sure if this is the reference, but I read a couple of philosophy books years ago about a Stoic philosopher called Seneca. So I don't know if that's
no,
okay,
it's
okay,
not.
then,
I don't even know about this philosopher.
okay, then I just thought maybe that had something to do with it, but never mind.
In my experience, Seneca is a Native American tribe from the region of upstate New York that I was born in.
Okay.
And it's about it's a lake actually called Seneca Lake, and I have a little tiny cabin that I bought like 5 or 6 years ago. It's a little 1-bedroom, tiny little spot on the edge of a cliff that overlooks the lake, and it's kind of the place. Well, it's where I do most of my demoing. It's kind of where I sketch out most of the songs and a lot of the lyrics. And I think the reason I go there to do that is it's a place that feels the most like home to me. It feels the most peaceful. And it's strange because this place is close to where I grew up, which is a source that, you know, where I grew up is a source of a lot of pain for me. So I think it's the mix of nostalgia, some of that pain, the familiarity, and also the beauty of the natural surroundings. Like it's this culmination of sorrow and beauty, and you know, and a lot of people describe my songs as like, oh, you have this really sad lyric wrapped in this kind of song that you want to dance to, you know. And I think everything that I've ever loved kind of is a mix of all of this stuff, you know, and like all my favorite movies and my favorite paintings and photographs and books. So you can always find both, you know, beauty and sadness. And I think those two things are really close to each other. Like if I'm experiencing joy, it's never pure joy. There's always a little bit of a ribbon of restraint and sadness because, you know, I think maybe we fear that joy will dissipate, and so we're sometimes scared to experience pure joy, and I know that I'm guilty of that. And then also the opposite, when there's, like for me, and maybe this isn't everyone's experience, but when I feel sadness, I can't ignore that there's also something that feels very like beautiful and romantic and almost, I don't know if joyful is the word, but there is something that's beautiful in sadness. It's a really textural feeling, and there's something almost warm about sadness. Like there's like this hug or something. It's like, but I think that's really like an evolutionary thing. Like I think our bodies and our minds, like we know deep down that crying and experiencing feelings is part of the human experience, and it's actually like healthy for us. Right. So I think if you want to get really technical about it, I think our body is saying, yes, cry, we need to cry, like that's part of being a human being. You know, but a lot of us kind of like don't want to do that because we want to be strong. Yeah,
but it's like what you mentioned in the beginning, the kind of experiencing that full spectrum of emotions and not just kind of shying away from certain areas.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about living with openness. But you know, you'd be surprised, or maybe not surprised.
But still, it's a difficult thing to do, I think.
It's a difficult thing to do, and a lot of people even, friends of mine who I just like wish could tap into how they're feeling and express it. I just see them like walking around every day in pain and never daring to talk about it. And so, I mean, I'm just sitting there thinking, this is going to be your existence every day till you die. You're okay with that, This is the best you can do. And some people are just so scared of that, I was on a holiday over Christmas in Mexico, and we had a group of probably 15 people. And I thought it'd be a really great idea for us all to really connect. And so on the first night, I kind of stood up and I said, I want us all to go around the table and just introduce, because some people didn't know other people. Let's all just introduce ourselves. Tell a little bit about yourself, so everyone did that. And then the second night, I stood up again and I just said, so I want us to like do that again, but like let's go the reverse way around the table. And instead of introducing yourself, I want you to introduce the person next to you and talk about them, So people are like, oh, this is a little bit less comfortable, and I have to talk about this person I don't really know, and I have to remember what they said last night and all this stuff. But it's just a way to kind of open people a little bit. And by the third night, there were some people who, because I wanted to push it just a little more on the third night, by the third night, there were people who wouldn't participate. That was it, boom, like I'm not going farther. And so, maybe I sound like a cult leader, I don't know. But my whole point was literally just for us all to really know each other, not spend a week and a half in Mexico kind of getting drunk and being silly, but like to connect. And but half of the group like didn't want to do that.
But again, I mean, yeah, I have both. I think I've had both, kind of those experiences with friends where it's just about nonsense, and then also the very deep ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't force people to kind of.
Yeah, you
and
can't
then
force.
With myself, I can in certain situations I won't show all of my feelings. So it's a tricky thing I find.
Yeah, and you want to feel safe if you want to feel like you can trust the group, and sometimes, but it's a fact. It's not a theory. It's a fact that you cannot gain trust without taking a risk.
Yeah.
Trust does not come for free. Trust always involves a risk. I'm going to say something, and I'm going to hope that these people understand me and they're not going to judge me. That's your little risk. And hopefully they're going to be kind and understand you and be grateful for your openness. So
with all this in mind, then, and
you're like, can we talk about music now?
No. As long as you don't mind, I don't mind.
No.
But talking about all of this, then, if you look at the world as it is these days, I mean, whenever you turn on the news, there's some nonsense going on.
Yes.
So how do you kind of not let that affect you? And then kind of, for instance, you could have written an album full of pointing fingers and
Yeah. Well, on Abysmal Thoughts, I wrote a song called Rich Kids, which was sort of like a fuck you to Donald Trump and his children and all that whole thing. And it wasn't, explicitly towards them, but it was like that idea. But even with Abysmal Thoughts, I wasn't in the space to make it like a political album, really. I mean, everything we do is technically political because it affects everyone around us. But I'm pretty active in my personal life, I go to the protests and I try to fundraise, and I work with different politicians sometimes and try to help them, and so I'm committed to certain causes that I believe in. But I felt for the last two albums that my responsibility as an artist was to sort of to provide an escape from all of this. We're not actually programmed to process so much tragedy. You know, you look at your phone and there's 12 stories about a school shooting or a genocide in Africa, or, you know, it's like, you know, our bodies and our minds are still operating like they were millions of years ago. We haven't evolved to be able to digest tragedy like that and grieve properly. So I find that it's much healthier, and you can actually be more effective if you're sort of focusing on one or two issues and really trying to make a change in that way, versus spreading yourself thin and being aware of every issue in the world. But with this album, I just had so much to say, you know, and I think the world could be a better place if we all were a bit more honest about our feelings, and if we all did learn how to love ourselves a little bit more. You know, a lot of this like strife, it just comes from a place of people deep down being really unhappy, you know? And so if we could create space for human happiness, that would be, I think, you know, no one would want to go to war. They'd be like, I feel good about myself.
I'm content. I have everything I need.
Yeah. And so, and I think we could also do away with religion too. People lean on religion because they're not happy and they don't feel safe, and they, you know, they feel insecure, and so they use God to fill in all of those gaps, to feel like more of a human, to feel stronger. And if we could just, you know, really love ourselves and love who we are, connect with each other, we're not going to need that false sense of security, you know?
Yeah, well, I don't think we'll ever, unfortunately, get rid of
No, I don't think so either.
Fair enough. But let's go into the joy then. Because there's a song also, Blip of Joy.
Yeah.
And then there's a line in that, I think it's from that song, with just one kiss I forget to hate myself. I hate myself. So those moments of joy, it's gonna sound weird, but how important are those to kind of find and cherish?
Yeah. Well, you know, that's a really unhealthy lyric. It really is. It's basically saying, as long as I'm with you, I don't hate myself, but that's putting all of your happiness on another person, you know?
Right.
That specific song I wrote for Abysmal Thoughts, and it didn't make it on the album. And then I sort of put new life into it, and it made sense to put it on Brutalism, because, you know, when I was making Brutalism, I actually had moved to Belgium, and I was in a relationship. I moved there for love, but the love was very brutal, and it was very, it was a lot of me giving of myself and giving a lot of love and not getting a lot in return. But as long as I felt like close to this guy, I would feel like I was okay. But if he had a habit of turning on me and being really unkind, and then suddenly I'd find myself feeling very alone and very, very unhappy, instead of feeling stable. You know what? He's treating me poorly, and I'm going to take care of myself and get out of this situation, you know. Instead, I would do anything to keep him close to me. And so, you know, very recently I was like in a different space, you know, and I eventually ended the relationship, but it was really hard. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, because I had become so reliant on his attention. As long as he was paying attention to me, I just felt much more worthwhile. And so even though I had written that song 3 years ago, it was just still so, and it showed me like, God, I have a long ways to go. That this, how I was feeling 3 years ago is still sometimes how I feel in relationships. But at least there's awareness there, you know, at least I have some awareness. But it's, you know, sadness and like darkness will always be there if you're looking for it. You'll always find it. But I also wanted to honor joy, you know? Joy and happiness is there too, for the taking, if you're looking for it, and if you're willing to work to get it, you know? It's everywhere, it's all around us. It's like in this piano, and it's in our conversation, and you just have to want it, and you have to be willing to do some things that are uncomfortable to get there, because sharing how you feel can be very scary. But no one ever said that, you know, health and wholeness and happiness were easy to get. You know, sometimes you have to walk through a wilderness alone to get to the other side.
Yeah, I was going to say that sadness and joy, I suppose, are very very much bound together. You can't have one without the other in a way. So what you mentioned about trust, that's also it works in a similar way. You have to give up a little bit of your happiness in a way, or
security.
Yeah, to get that to that other side.
Yeah.
One last thing then, because you mentioned the kind of wanting to make genuine connections and significant connections with people and fans. So I don't know how much you've played the songs of Brutalism for people, but what have you noticed about how people react and what they see in the music?
Well, we haven't played any shows with the new songs. Just on this press tour, we started playing some acoustic versions of a couple of the songs. And, you know, people keep asking about this song Loner. So we've been playing Loner in all of these radio sessions, and I think it's a song that speaks to people because I think, you know, I'm saying something in the song that everyone could say, which is, you know, well, let me rephrase that. Anyone who's intelligent and sensitive could say. So anyone who like really thinks about themselves and their place in the world. It's about this space that I've always existed in, where half of me craves human connection and being social and having fulfillment in that, and then the other part of me, and sometimes the part that wins, is the fear of that exact thing. Like, scared that people won't accept me, or that I won't belong, or that I won't be good enough. And so those two things are constantly at war. And sometimes they're just both of equal strength, and it kind of paralyzes me, so I don't do anything, you know? And so life just kind of chugs along and stays the same. So I think it's a pretty universal thing. I think a lot of people, from my experience, a lot of people have told me like that song is meaningful to them. They really feel that in their heart, and they connect to it. So I've really enjoyed playing that song a lot. Any time that someone connects to something that I've done, it just gives me more fuel to make more, and to go even deeper into the nuances of how I feel.
That's kind of the payoff for delving into yourself and going through all of that.
It is. It's the ultimate payoff, you know. I feel like a pig in shit sometimes, you know. It's just like, oh, it feels so good, you know. I've realized, you know, I've toured the world, and I've done everything from sleeping on floors to staying at the Four Seasons, and I've partied with celebrities, and I've walked the streets in the rain alone, and I feel like I've seen and done a lot, and I never feel as good as I feel when someone is touched by the art that I put into the world, you know, because I'm touched in those moments. So
I think that's a beautiful ending.
Cool.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You think you got it all?
Yeah.
All
Well,
right.
I always worry with these types of interviews whether I should kind of introduce the music a little bit more. But I prefer.
The music will speak for itself.